Good day. My name is LJ Stambuk. I'm the President and CEO of the World Affairs Council. I'm delighted to have a program with Jake Wood today, the World Affairs Council Distinguished Speaker Series program. It's going to be a very, very interesting program, and I welcome all the members and all the participants to this program today. Jake Wood is the co-founder and CEO of Team Rubicon. He's a veteran and an author, and he's going to speak on crossing the Rubicon, leading in crisis. The World Affairs Council of Charlotte is the community's premier global education, nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, and we have always sought to bring the word closer to you and to build a community of internationally informed and engaged citizens. Dialogue, knowledge, active participation, and an understanding of global issues are vitally important for our democracy to flourish at all levels. A couple of housekeeping points. Your microphone will be muted and your camera will be turned off for the duration of the presentation. Please do prepare your questions for Jake Wood. To submit a question at any time, use the question and answer box in the Zoom toolbar. You can see it circled in red in front of you. Please do not use the chat box. The chat box is for you to chat with us, the World Affairs Council staff, if you would like to make a point or ask us a question. This presentation will be recorded and will be shared with all of you through our World Affairs Council of Charlotte mailing list. So please make sure that you're signed up with the correct email and that you are able to receive our emails with the recording of today's program with Jake Wood. Couple of upcoming programs just to share with you. We're proud to have the Young Professional World Affairs Council meeting. It is a meetup virtual barbecue mixer with the young professionals of World Affairs Council of San Antonio. This is going to be fun. Anyone between 20 and 40 and above is invited to come. We're all young professionals and it's a lot of fun to join these programs. On June 3rd, 2021, we will have the World Affairs Council Distinguished Speakers Panel Series with Zoran Krneta, who is the sporting director, and Nick Kelly, who is the team president of the Charlotte Football Club. As you know, we will have a new football club here in Charlotte starting play very soon next year, and this is a chance for you all to speak to the sporting director and the team president of the Charlotte Football Club on June 3rd. On June 9th, 2021, we will have the Distinguished Speaker Series with Dr. Claude Clegg. He's an author and a historian and professor at UNC Chapel Hill, and he'll speak on the topic From Africa to America, A Journey Through Black History, a very important program. I invite you all to join us on June 9th. And then someone who's been here in Charlotte with us before, I'm very happy to announce that on June 17th, 2021, we'll have the Distinguished Speaker Series with General Retired David Petraeus, who is now a director of the KKR Institute and is the former commander of CENTCOM ISAF and director of the CIA. He will speak on America's longest war, what the US withdrawal could mean for Afghanistan and global security. Again, we're very honored to have General Petraeus with us again, speaking on Afghanistan. The timing cannot be better. If you're a member, we thank you. Your support means a lot to us. If you're not a member, we would like to invite you to become a member. Again, your support means a lot to the World Affairs Council of Charlotte. Like any nonprofit in these very challenging times, we would not be here and not be able to have these kinds of programs and activities without your support. So please donate if you can, or become a World Affairs Council of Charlotte member. We would appreciate it. Thank you. We're on all modalities of social media. If you would like to follow us, please do. We would be happy to have you. Now, the guest of the day, guest of honor, Jake Wood, as I said, who co-founded Team Rubicon alongside William McNulty following the Haiti earthquake in 2010, and he has served as its president and chief executive officer since that time. Prior to Team Rubicon, Jake served in the Marine Corps as a scout sniper with tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. Wood is a nationally recognized social entrepreneur and keynote speaker whose awards include being named a CNN Hero, the Heinz Award, Goldman Sachs 100 Most Intriguing Entrepreneurs, the Grinnell Prize, and the Chronicle of Philanthropy 40 Under 40. Wood is a published author and a graduate of the University of Wisconsin. When not crisscrossing the country for Team Rubicon on a 737, Jake and his wife like to disappear to destinations around the world and have been to more than 50 countries. And that's why he's here with us, among other reasons, the World Affairs Council of Charlotte. Let me just add a personal note. When I was getting vaccinated some time ago, there were multiple members of Team Rubicon helping people. They were very effective, they were very friendly, and they were needed. There was a lot of seniors being vaccinated, and their help was so important. And I shared that with Jake already before the program. Jake, thank you for all you do and your team. And it is my honor and delight to turn it over to you, Jake. Welcome.
Yes. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for having me here. I very much appreciate the invitation to join the World Affairs Council of Charlotte. What an incredible group, really, you know, and for me, on a personal level, you saw a little bit about my bio. You know, for the longest time, been a big believer that, you know, what is really, you know, causing this division that we have in our country is this lack of empathy that we have for people that are different from us. And that lack of empathy is really driven by a lack of perspective. And so, you know, to all of you, I tip my hat for, you know, going out of your way to gain, you know, a broader perspective on the world around you, the community around you, because I truly think that that is what we need. So again, it's an honor to be here. As was mentioned by LJ, my name is Jake Wood. I am the founder and CEO of Team Rubicon. I wrote a book that was published last November called Once a Warrior, that is really the memoir of my experiences, of which I'll spend some time here for the next 20 to 25 minutes speaking about. And prior to all of that, in what seems like another lifetime, I was a sergeant in the United States Marine Corps, one of the proudest jobs I'm most proud of in my life. You know, I'm going to speak to you here for the next, you know, like I said, 20 to 25 minutes, and I'm really excited to open it up for a question and answer, which will be moderated by my good friend, Dr. Dave Calloway, who I think is no stranger to most of you. So let's begin. I think I'm really here because of my role as the CEO of Team Rubicon. And you might be wondering, you know, what is Team Rubicon? Team Rubicon is a nonprofit organization, a 501c3. Our primary mission is to recruit, train, engage, and deploy military veterans for disaster response and work in humanitarian crises and conflicts around the globe. We founded the organization back in 2010 in response to the Haiti earthquake. It's a story that I will tell shortly. But over the last 11 and a half years, this organization has scaled to unimaginable levels. And really, you know, where I'll drive this conversation today is the work that we've been able to do over the course of the last 14 months in response to the pandemic, which of course has gripped all of our lives over that time. But before I really talk about Team Rubicon, I think it's important for us to even just rewind the clock a little bit further. You know, it was mentioned that in my background, I served in the Marine Corps, which really is what laid the foundation and led me to be able to begin and grow and scale Team Rubicon to what it is today. I joined the Marine Corps in 2005. I joined after going to the University of Wisconsin-Madison for 4 years. I was fortunate enough to be there and to play college football for the Badgers. I earned my degree in business and political science. And when I was sitting there graduating as a senior in 2005, I looked at the world around me, and, you know, I had this opportunity to go off and, you know, go into banking like a lot of my other colleagues from the business school, but that really didn't compel me. That wasn't really the life that I was pursuing at the moment. On the other hand, I looked at what was happening in the world around me. And in 2005, of course, our country was embroiled in 2 wars. I was a freshman 4 years earlier when 9/11 happened. I was deeply moved, as we all were, by that moment in time. But for 4 years, I had watched from the comfort of that college campus as young men and women, really no different from me, marched off, you know, to Iraq and Afghanistan. And so at the conclusion of my time on campus, I made that decision that I was going to go off and I was going to join them and join the fight. So I enlisted into the Marine Corps as a private. I was shipped off to Southern California, where I still live today. I'm joining you all from Los Angeles, and chose to enlist into the infantry. It was a choice that really only a dumb 22-year-old kid can make. I want to go fight, so I'm going to join the infantry. And that's what I did. And after about a year of training, my unit was deployed to Iraq for my first tour, to an area known as the Triangle of Death. It was 2007, which was the year that Congress and President Bush authorized what was known as the surge, or a large influx of troops to try to pacify what was an increasingly deteriorating situation in Iraq. And this was a really hard and frankly, really bloody tour. It ended up being the bloodiest tour, the bloodiest year of the entire Iraq war. More insurgents were killed, more US troops perished in those 12 months than any 12-month period before or after. And, to be honest with you, not only did I learn a lot about myself, not only did I learn a lot about leadership, as I was thrust unexpectedly into a leadership role 2 weeks into my first deployment, when my squad leader was wounded and sent home, and I was promoted and put in charge of that 13-man infantry squad. But I also learned a lot about the world around me. I saw firsthand what issues like sectarianism and poverty play in extremism and the violence that we see perpetuating around the globe, and frankly and terrifyingly right here at home in the United States today. And so this was an eye-opening experience for me to spend these 7 months in the Anbar province in Iraq. Now, I was very fortunate. I came back from Iraq and I had all my fingers and all my toes, and was given the opportunity to try out for a scout sniper platoon, and took that opportunity, tried out for the sniper platoon, was fortunate enough to be selected, and eventually sent to sniper school, which has is one of the hardest schools in the Marine Corps to pass. It's got about a 60 to 70% failure rate. And I can guarantee you every single day that I was there for 10 weeks, I was confident that it was going to be my last day. I didn't quite think that I had what it was going to take to make it. But luckily, after the end of 10 weeks, I found myself graduating from sniper school. And really within a month, my unit was sent to Afghanistan, back overseas. 2008, my unit was sent to a part of Afghanistan, a southern province called the Helmand Valley, specifically to a city called Sangin, which at the time, this was a hotbed and remains to this day a hotbed of the Taliban. But as well, really the epicenter of the poppy harvest, the poppy crop that dominates the agricultural regions of southern Afghanistan. It fuels the poppy and the illicit opium trade that really serves as the primary moneymaker for the Taliban. And so, again, just an eye-opening experience for me. It really reinforced this newfound perspective that I had on the world of really the factors that go into extremism and violence, and specifically in a place like Afghanistan, more so than Iraq, things like education, things like women's rights, really played these powerful roles in the insurgency that we were fighting there. Now, again, I was really lucky. It was a really grueling tour, and I was fortunate that after 7 long months, I came home and I had all my fingers and all my toes, and had to make probably one of the hardest decisions of my life. And that was whether I stayed in the Marine Corps and enlisted for another 4 years of fighting those wars, or whether I got out. And frankly, I came to the conclusion that while I was proud of my service and I would do it all again, I didn't want war to define who I was. And I made the really tough choice to get out of the Marine Corps. But to be completely honest, I didn't know what I was going to do next. And so a couple months after I got out of the Marine Corps, I was sitting in my apartment in Los Angeles, and I saw the images of the Haiti earthquake come across the screen. And I sat there for hours and hours and hours that first day in January 2010. I was watching all those images come across, and I couldn't help but think how similar those images were to the situations I had just been in Iraq and Afghanistan. And after a couple of hours, I called an organization that I knew was responding on the ground in Haiti. And I told them about my background in the military. I told them about my experiences in tough situations overseas. And I told them that I could volunteer for free for the next 6 months if they'd have me. And you can probably imagine how this story ends. Nice woman on the other end of the phone said, sir, thank you, but no thanks. Why don't you just text us $10? And that was a really frustrating thing to hear. And so I hung up the phone, And I organized a team of Marines and friends that I'd served with. We went down to Haiti. And long story short, this small team of 8, we flew to the Dominican Republic. We crossed overland into Haiti about 4 days after the earthquake, a team of veterans and doctors. And we got to work running medical triage clinics all throughout the city, going to places that other organizations either could not or would not go, and delivering this medical assistance to them in their greatest time of need, undoubtedly saving, dozens, if not hundreds of lives along the way. And it was down in Haiti that this concept for Team Rubicon really first spawned. You see, we came back and we had this idea that we were going to build the best disaster response organization in the world based on this single premise. And that premise was that these men and women who have spent decades fighting these wars, training for these wars overseas, and coming back, have developed this deep body of skill, this deep body of experience that doesn't just disappear and go away when they take that military uniform off for the last time. And so we had this concept that we could build a better disaster response organization by recruiting these men and women, as many of the 3 million that had served since 9/11, into a new model for disaster response. And frankly, over the course of the last 11 and a half years, I think we have proven that premise is true. And if you zoom out for a second and imagine for a moment what we do, it'll demonstrate to you just how special the skill set is for these men and women. You see, we take people who have often never met one another. We send them to a community that they've never been to in the midst of a catastrophe, whether it's a flood, a hurricane, a tornado. And on that ground, it is limited in resources, it is limited in information, and yet we have to find a way for them to execute against a set of objectives that are big and bold and ambitious, and stay safe and execute to this professional standard along the way. And yet hundreds and hundreds of times over the last decade, we have been able to do that, large scale and small scale, far-flung reaches of the globe, far-flung reaches across the United States. We've deployed tens of thousands of individuals into these scenarios across hundreds of disasters. And yet we've been able to do that with this consistent level of success. And so at its core, what Team Rubicon does is lead through moments of crisis. And that's really the crux of the conversation today. And so no crisis has been bigger in the last 100 years than COVID-19 and what it has done to the globe. And so if we rewind the clock 15 months ago and we think about where we were in February or March of 2020, when Team Rubicon, who had been monitoring what was going on with COVID when it was still kind of in China, not yet a global pandemic, we often send medical teams internationally to assist healthcare systems that are overwhelmed with rapid onset events like typhoons or civil wars, but in some cases, infectious disease outbreaks. So we were monitoring this thing, and it didn't necessarily catch us off guard when it came to the US. Nonetheless, this thing blew up to be way bigger than anybody had anticipated 15 months ago. And so we sat around the table, my leadership team and I, and we really phrased or formed all of our thinking around this question. Are we going to treat this as an existential threat, or are we going to treat COVID-19 as our greatest moment, the greatest opportunity that we have ever been presented to have impact on the world and the community around us, to leverage our resources, the men and women in Team Rubicon, in ways that we never could have imagined 2 days prior to that moment that we were having that conversation. And so, as you can imagine, we really settled on, this will be our greatest moment. We must rise to the occasion and get into the fight against COVID-19 as quickly and as aggressively as possible. And that's exactly what we did. We had never done anything like support food security as a mission set prior to COVID-19. And yet in the days, literally the days after COVID-19 hit, we were sending thousands of volunteers into food banks to help prop up and support the operations of amazing organizations like Feeding America, who saw their volunteers disappear overnight because most of them were in that older age demographic and extremely vulnerable to COVID-19. And we supported hundreds of food banks simultaneously across the country, helping them to retool their operations for a COVID environment. When we realized that some people couldn't even get to the food bank to receive food because they were so vulnerable and susceptible to this disease, we designed something we call the Emergency Food Assistance Program. We built a technology platform that allowed people to submit their food and medication needs to our platform, and our platform would then automatically notify our volunteers within the vicinity of that citizen to that request, and they would deliver that food, that medication directly to their doorstep, just like a Seamless or an Uber Eats driver would, pick up your takeout for you and bring it to your house for your Sunday night movie night with the kids. We knew immediately that healthcare systems across the country would get overwhelmed. And while New York City's healthcare system was melting down, we began immediately turning our attention to the healthcare systems elsewhere in the country that could be suffering that next overwhelming wave. We set up a 250-bed federal medical station in Santa Clara County, seemingly overnight. Now, that medical station did not treat the number of patients that we anticipated that it would, thank God. But being able to aggressively move into that mission allowed us to pivot that knowledge that we gained and the people that had done it and move them into Navajo Nation, which did then begin suffering the worst outbreak on a per capita basis in the country. And we have been serving in Navajo Nation, not continuously, but for well over several hundred days, treating thousands and thousands of patients, and then are now running a large-scale vaccination program to help support their recovery there. And then finally, chalking things up to the list of things I never thought I'd see us do. We set up first in partnership with Atrium Health there in North Carolina, later in partnership with Verily Health Sciences along the Western US, rapid and mobile testing and screening clinics for COVID-19. Again, the type of thing that Team Rubicon never thought that it would be doing in the days prior to this COVID-19 outbreak. And so, how did we lead through this moment? I'm just going to share just a couple of lessons that I've used to really frame leading this organization over the last year. The first one is this military mantra that you learn early in military service, and that is panic is contagious, particularly in moments like COVID-19 brought. But what's really interesting, what's important to remember, is that leadership is contagious too. Just about every other behavior that you can demonstrate in the front of the people that you're leading, they're going to reflect that attitude, that behavior back to you. And so it's really important for leaders in these moments to understand that they have to lead by example in this moment. They have to confront the brutal facts of the situation that they're facing. They can't simply bury their head in the sand and hope that things are going to be better than they appear to be. I think that was one of the things that people relied on far too much early in this process. They hoped COVID-19 would stay in China. They hoped it wasn't as transmissible as people first suspected. They hoped that it was simply just another seasonal flu. Well, hope is not a strategy. And it's incumbent upon leaders to ensure that they are being clear and concise and consistent with the people that they're leading, looking them in the eye and helping them to understand the sobering reality of the situation that they faced. Because it's only then that people understand that you as a leader trust them with that hard truth, so that collectively and collaboratively, you can work towards the solutions to overcome those moments. In the absence of a plan, move toward the sound of battle. We didn't have a playbook for an infectious disease outbreak that would find all 50 states in the US under an emergency declaration. Simply that scenario is so implausible prior to 2020 that building that plan would have been, a fool's errand. And so when this happened, we didn't have something, a neat set of protocols that we could walk over and take off the shelf and say, okay, here's what we're going to do. And leaders in organizations in moments like this then have a choice. They can hunker down and they can build a plan, at their desk, again, hunker down, doing everything they can to protect themselves from the uncertainty and the complexity of the world around them. Or they can embrace the reality of what they're facing and push their teams, their organizations out to probe the problem, to get out there and understand what it is, to figure it out on the fly. And that's exactly what Team Rubicon did. Like I said, we immediately pushed thousands of our volunteers out into these communities across the country, identifying, work to do with food security, identifying work that we could do in things like establishing homeless shelters for populations experiencing homelessness that were vulnerable to COVID, identifying that we could manage the collection and distribution of all personal protective equipment for the entire city of Chicago. We were only able to meet these needs because we pushed our people out there to identify them and to solve for them. And what we saw was that, while we were pushing our teams out initially with just 2 pages of hacked together COVID operations guidance, which we iterated on every single day for 57 days until finally at the end of 2 months, we had a 100-page manual that was on version 60. Instead, many of our compatriots in the space, they didn't even emerge from their cocoon for 2 months. They were non-operational for that entire period. And then they finally emerged with a document that they had developed again at their desks. And that document was often wrought with inconsistent guidance or guidance that was impractical in a COVID environment. And I'm always reminded of this phrase I once saw, which was, no problem was ever solved from a swivel chair. So in moments of crisis like COVID-19 presented, think of it from that construct. No problem was ever solved from a swivel chair. You have to both figuratively and literally get out there to probe the problem in order to develop the solutions. And second to last, culture. This is something that we talk about incessantly at Team Rubicon. And when we talk about culture at Team Rubicon, the phrase that I've always tried to drive home with our teams is what you see here on the screen. Culture guides decisions in the absence of orders. It's how people implicitly know what to do or how to act when they have not been explicitly told what to do. And in a moment that it is as fluid, that is as wrought with misinformation or disinformation or a lack of information as COVID, certain that is scary, that's paralyzing, it is that culture that's going to allow you to quickly move through that and confidently let go of your teams to go and solve those problems for you. Now, there's a couple of things that I always, talk about, and I give, entire keynote speeches on how to develop cultures, but, I'll frame it in this way. The Marine Corps, where I served, it'll teach its infantrymen tactics, battlefield tactics at a chalkboard, just like a football coach. They'll draw the X's and O's and they'll talk about what a Marine infantry squad or platoon or company should do when it encounters some enemy engagement, a near ambush, a far ambush. And they'll talk about the X's and O's and they'll talk about how this unit maneuvers this way and this unit lays down a base of fire. And those X's and O's are important because they are tried and true standard operating procedures that every Marine should know implicitly. But what they do and spend twice as much time on as they do the X's and O's is the storytelling. They tell stories of what Marines in past battles have done on the battlefield when encountering that exact same situation. And why do they tell stories? They know that stories have this lasting imprint in our mind. Those stories, they're things that we remember. And those stories are something that when Marines go to bed at night, whether they admit it or not, they stare at the ceiling and they imagine themselves living up to those very same moments. They imagine themselves encountering the exact same situation as John Basilone did in the Battle of Guadalcanal. And they want to envision themselves rising to the occasion and executing to the standards and the history and the expectations of the Marine Corps in that very same way. Because the Marine Corps knows that when that Marine goes out on that battlefield and experiences that close ambush from the enemy, they're probably not going to remember the X's and O's, but they're going to remember the story. They're going to remember John Basilone, and they're going to do everything that they can to live up to that legacy. And it's that cultural expectation that is going to guide their decisions, their actions, their behaviors in the absence of explicit orders or in the absence of those X's and O's. And then I'll close with this last lesson, which I think is probably the most important, and that is to empower your people. I'm going to trust that you're all incredible leaders in your own right in whatever industry that you're in. I imagine that you've all recruited incredible teams, that you've done a good job of mentoring them, of putting them in position to succeed. It's in those moments of consequence, though, those moments like COVID-19 brought us, that it's imperative for us as leaders to actually just step back and let your people move forward and solve those problems for you. Sometimes that temptation is to stand out in front of them and strike a pose and say something super motivational and try to lead like General Patton. But it's actually in those moments where you just need to step back, give your people the tools and the resources that they need, and let them go off and do incredible things. It's only when we empower our people that our organizations can move with the speed and the agility that are required in these moments of crisis. If you can do that, if you can, have that speed and agility, then your organization is going to be flexible and it's going to be resilient. And that's ultimately what an organization needs to be what it needs to be successful in a moment like that. And I'll close by just talking about what Team Rubicon is doing right now, leveraging everything that we did during the first 9 months of the pandemic and all of those lessons that I just spoke about. We've spent the last 5 months here in the US, and you heard LJ preview this, helping to support vaccination operations all across the country. Your colleague, Dave Calloway, came to our leadership team last fall and said, hey, it's clear we're going to have multiple viable vaccines. It's also evident that there is no plan for how we distribute them to 300 million Americans. And so Team Rubicon immediately set out to plan how we could support healthcare systems, state, local, and county governments across the country in their efforts, with a focus on how do we ensure that your zip code does not dictate the ease at which you can get a COVID-19 vaccine, ensuring that there was that equality of distribution. And we've been doing that now for 5 months. We've supported millions of vaccination doses across the country and are currently attacking the highest hanging fruit across the country, working on rural and mobile delivery. So again, we can guarantee that your zip code does not dictate how easy it is for you to get vaccinated. And so, I'm really proud of the work that we've been doing. Again, nobody anticipated that this is what the last 12 to 15 months would hold when we turned to the calendar from 2019 to 2020. But Team Rubicon, we didn't have the playbook for COVID-19, but we certainly had the players. And it's been inspiring for me as CEO to watch over the last 15 months as this team has risen to the occasion and ultimately made this Team Rubicon's greatest moment instead of its most lethal threat. So again, happy to be here. I hope that you have a bunch of questions for me because I'm excited to answer them. And I guess with that, I'll invite Dr. Dave Calloway up to facilitate.
Awesome. Thanks, Jake. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great presentation as always. We've got some good questions in the chat. We'll get to them in a second. I'm going to ask you a twofold question because I think it goes to the core of who you are and who the organization is. So you talked about the origin story, Haiti. You talked about COVID. Can you talk to us a little bit about your views on boldness and risk? I mean, it's a little bit easy to be bold when you don't have anything to lose. When you're just a sergeant out of the military, grabbing some guys going to Haiti. But now you're responsible for hundreds of people's jobs, huge organization, reputational brand. How do you calculate your decisions to continue to be bold and to manage risk? And then I'm going to follow up with two specific ones on this.
Okay, great question. I guess I'm a sucker for military maxims. I've always been a big believer in the old adage that fortune favors the bold. And so, these moments, I kind of refer to them as moments of consequence. They require bold action. They require decisive action. And I think it's important, though, for leaders to always measure that boldness against foolishness, right? And I think that there's a couple of ways that leaders can do that. One, a leader has to be humble enough to understand his or her own limitations. I'm constantly reminded of my own limitations. I married a woman who made sure that she would do that for me. But leaders also need to build teams that consistently have and will take that contrarian point of view, who will push back on perspectives and assumptions and decisions to ensure that foolishness isn't creeping in to the decision cycle. So, we often say that we're in the business of risk. We're constantly evaluating it. And when we think about, how did boldness look in the face of what we did early in COVID-19, while we pushed our teams out the door in those initial days without much guidance, we did that with the understanding that our teams in our organization is very safety oriented. We took the approach and the mantra that we were only going to execute operations with, three things in mind: the safety of our volunteers, the safety of the communities they were serving, and the safety of the communities that they were returning to. And, it was our early foray into that risk that allowed us to probe and understand the risks as they were presenting in the situations that we're involved in, which constantly then created this feedback loop that allowed us to get better, that allowed us to get safer, but it also allowed us to get bolder and do things like testing, which again wasn't even on our roadmap in those early days. So look forward to your follow-ups.
Yeah, thanks, man. And so following up on that and your key point about stories, can you tell the group about 2015 and 2017, who the organization was, what happened, and how you made these decisions? Because I just recall our conversation we had about a week ago, and you said, well, I'm not acting like I was in 2015. These were two big changes in how TR operated and how it viewed the world.
Yeah, I think you made the comment earlier about, it's easy to be bold when you're not risking much. And certainly, early in Team Rubicon's growth and history, the stakes were much smaller. I mean, the stakes at times were still people's lives. I mean, we were still sending teams out into some fairly thorny situations, but the financial risk was much less, the reputational risk was much less. And frankly, the world, or at least the United States, hadn't come to count on Team Rubicon yet. And so if we had disappeared overnight, it's not as though communities would be left hanging in Team Rubicon's absence. But as we continued to scale, it became increasingly clear that if we screwed this up, if we made a decision that actually, threatened the existence of the organization, that there would be people in the aftermath of disasters in these communities who would suffer greatly in our absence. And so, yeah, I mean, you mentioned, 2017, for example, a massive inflection point for the organization. That was the year, for those of you that don't recall, that hurricanes Harvey, Irma, and Maria slammed into Texas, Florida, and Puerto Rico, respectively. And the organization took some really bold, made some really bold decisions in the aftermath of those hurricanes. They paid off. The organization quadrupled in size in the 12 months that followed. We launched entirely new programs that had been on our strategic roadmap for a while. So we were ready and prepared to make those expansions. But subsequent to that, then the risk profile changed, right? And the risk-taking profile changed somewhat. But then you come to this moment, like COVID, and you realize it's all or nothing in that moment. We knew early that the suffering was going to be immense. And I think we were willing to bet it all, to put all of our chips on the table in order to help meet that need. And that's the approach we took.
Yeah, thanks, Jake. And that leads into our first sort of question from the audience that asks, what other relief fields are Team Rubicon looking to expand to since COVID has broadened the scope of your mission? So maybe a little talk on how we innovate in space and crisis innovation, and how you view the evolving mission of the organization.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that has made Team Rubicon successful over the years is we've really had a laser focus on what we would do within our space, and we were very disciplined in not trying to be too many things. And we honestly, we threw that out the window with COVID. We said, we can't afford to be disciplined here. We have to do everything that's asked of us. We have to get to yes, was actually our mantra. When we had these requests coming in from communities, our mantra was get to yes, find a way to get to yes, find a way to meet the need. And so one of the real interesting conversations right now is how do we snap back to something that's more aligned to what we were, while still maintaining all of the positive evolutions that the organization has experienced over the last 12 months. And, I can't say that there's, an easy answer to that, but, we have certainly expanded our medical capabilities. We have expanded our ability to rapidly research, outfit, and deploy capabilities, something we're referring to as crisis innovation. Do I think that we're going to continue to be working in food security? No. We don't have a unique competency in a space like that. And so we'll leave that to the pros on the backside of COVID. That'll be Feeding America's space. There'll be Meals on Wheels space. And so, our approach is always, is there a gap in the delivery meeting the need? And are we uniquely suited to fill that gap, either because of our capacity or our capability, our ability to innovate into that capability? And if we can't answer yes, then we'll leave it to the people who are already doing it.
I appreciate it, Jake. So Michael Mendoza asked a question, and I think maybe there are two ways that might be interested to look at it. So basically, he says, experience with TR and disaster brings unique challenges. Can you share a time or two when you weren't quite sure if you're going to meet the mission, but pulled it through anyways? What were some of the factors at play ultimately that resulted in your team succeeding? And I wonder, Jake, could you maybe talk about it from tactical, operational, like specific mission, but also just thinking about how the organization has matured and the very complex decisions that now go into running a multi-million-dollar international NGO, which you are a CEO of a big organization now. So it's not just can you get food to the door; it's can you wrap around the whole thing?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, there have been no shortage of missions that we approached wondering, are we gonna be able to meet our obligations to this community? And a couple popped to mind. I mentioned Hurricane Harvey earlier. There was this unprecedented moment at the beginning of Hurricane Harvey, where, if you'll recall, it rained for 96 straight hours over the city of Houston. It dumped, I think the number was 60 trillion with a T, gallons of water in that county, about 48 inches of water. And after about 36 hours, the police chief for Houston got on the television and he said, every citizen with a shallow bottom boat needs to put their boat in the water and go rescue their neighbors. That is an extraordinary, and I would go so far as to say unprecedented, request of a public official for private citizens to put themselves in real harm's way. And so Team Rubicon did not have a swift water rescue capability. We knew we had a lot of Navy rescue swimmers. We knew we had a lot of firefighters with expertise in technical rescue and swift water rescue. But we didn't have boats and we didn't have defined doctrine for what we would do. Nonetheless, we looked at this and we said, unprecedented times call for unprecedented decisions, and we're going to get boats. We're going to go buy them right now and we're going to put them in the water. And we hastily pulled together a team. We had people on flights within hours to Dallas, and we had boats in the water sometime later that evening. And was I concerned? Hell yeah, I was concerned. I mean, there's a lot that can go wrong in that moment. People can hit underwater hazards. They can hit down power lines, and you could lose a person that you're trying to rescue, let alone one of your own people. And so, sat there for about 36 to 48 hours wondering if we were going to pull that off. Likewise, in that same kind of slate of events, Hurricane Maria tears across Puerto Rico, and, we deploy a team. Bear in mind that we already have probably close to 1,000 volunteers on the ground in Houston. We've got 250 volunteers on the ground in Florida after Hurricane Irma. Maria hits, and this might be the worst disaster of all of them. And suddenly, we have part of our organization saying we cannot stretch into a third area of operation. And we're saying we don't have a choice. We have to find a way. And so we sent medical teams into Puerto Rico. And Doc, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that was the first time we ever deployed our medical capability on U.S. soil, and it being a U.S. territory. And which was, challenging to navigate. No power on the island, no resupply, limited food and water. And then what happens is we end up raising an additional $5 million in Puerto Rico, and we commit to rebuilding roofs. And we have this interesting choice early as we are evaluating that process. It becomes clear that the majority of people most impacted by Hurricane Maria could not prove that they owned the home that they'd been living in, perhaps for generations. They didn't have any title or paperwork or deed to the property. And this was a well-known problem within Puerto Rico before the storm. And most NGOs and FEMA specifically would not fund or pay to repair homes that the owner could not prove ownership of, which left a massive gap in services to the people who were probably most vulnerable on the island. So we took our $5 million and we decided to cut it against the grain. And we said, we're only going to rebuild roofs for people who cannot prove that they own their homes. We got a lot of backlash for that from some organizations that were adjacent in the space. We had a lot of people who said, this is illegal. We had a lot of people who said the government's going to come in and raise these roofs down to the ground. We said, you know what? Be damned if we don't try, because these people need roofs. And it's inhumane to think that Americans are going to be sleeping under the stars for the next 2 years while they wait to scrape together the funds to put a roof back over their families' heads. So we certainly thought that that might be a decision that would haunt us, but it was probably one of my proudest decisions from the last decade.
Yeah, Jake, I remember that one, and one of there are multiple times where I'm proud to be associated with the organization. That's one of them, for sure. We have a couple questions combined. One is just talking a little bit more about our international work and how we interact with host governments. And then there's a separate one that talks about several that are interested in how do we recruit the right people? How do you recruit the right people, vet them, instill the culture, and then on the back end, build resilience and prevent burnout? Yeah,
there's a lot to unpack there. I'm not sure we're gonna have time to even get through all three of those. I'll start with the first one. How do we work within our international operations with foreign countries? Everything that we do, and this is part of the evolution of the organization, because I will say that early in Team Rubicon's history, we did none of the coordination that would typically be required of an NGO, and that allowed us to move swiftly and independently. It also, put up a lot of unnecessary roadblocks for us and had us, running afoul of many of the major players in the space. And so we grew up over the last 4 or 5 years. We've really ingrained ourselves into that international community of responders. We work directly through the UN and its sub-agencies like the World Health Organization, the World Food Program, to ensure we're coordinating through those bodies in the cluster, what's called the cluster system. And of course, we're doing all of our work in coordination with those local governments. So, I'll give you an example that's appropriate for the moment. We've been working to determine what needs there are for a team like ours with our capabilities in India. And most recently, the World Food Program has indicated a desire to have us deployed to Nepal, which is not getting as much attention as India, but may actually be facing a worse catastrophe, COVID outbreak. So that answers that question, hopefully. As far as how do we recruit and vet people? I mentioned that, I sometimes give entire keynotes on culture. One of the interesting things about culture is, when you're building a culture early and you're building a team, you can build that culture through the people that you put on that team, right? And you pick people for their values, for their attitudes, for how they, interact and work with one another. But that doesn't scale, right? And at a certain point, an organization's sheer size necessitates that, you should be able to bring in almost any type of person. Of course, there's always going to be, non-negotiable values and virtues that person must hold. But you should be able to bring in really just about any type of person, and the strength of the organization's culture assimilates them into the values, the shared beliefs of that culture. And that's really how we approach Team Rubicon. And frankly, it's really an approach that I think I first learned, whether I knew it or not, with the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps takes people of all shapes and sizes, all different backgrounds from all across the country, and it puts them through a process that indoctrinates them, which at the end of that process, they come out and they are not who they once were. They are now a Marine. And the process isn't perfect, but that's very similar to what we've tried to accomplish at Team Rubicon, where we can bring in people from really diverse backgrounds But after a couple of experiences with the organization, they identify as gray shirts, which is the term that we use for our volunteers. And so I think that that's really among the strengths that we have, that we can bring people from such far-flung groups and geographies and backgrounds and bring them together into a common culture. Again, not perfect, but we've been able to scale accordingly. Now it's a little bit different for international operations, much higher risk profile. Obviously, there's a different vetting process for that. It's somewhat technical, but we won't get into it. You certainly want to make sure that if you're sending someone halfway around the world to go sleep in the bush in Mozambique, that they know how to, handle that type of stressful environment, and that they have the demonstrated judgment and maturity to thrive in that type of austerity. And Dave, I apologize, but I can't remember what the third question was.
Yeah, well, so burnout. I think one thing to talk about we have a couple minutes left, but this idea of the VSO and the Veteran Service Organization and dealing with PTSD and burnout, and it's a very complex issue in general, but also for you personally and for the organization. And maybe could you give your thoughts on how the organization approaches that with the volunteers and just philosophically?
Yeah, I think that burnout is a real thing, and it certainly has been throughout COVID. I think many companies have seen that their employees, in the absence of a commute, in the absence of all of these other elements of our previous work lives, are now working, instead of 8 hours a day or 9 hours a day, they're working 12 or 13 hours a day because they can't escape their work. And so Team Rubicon's no different. Our volunteers are deeply passionate about what we do, and that's both a blessing and a curse. They're passionate about what we do because they can see the impact every day. If you go and you support a vaccination site, you vaccinate 1,000 people, you can go home and you can be fairly confident that you certainly saved some significant portion of them from getting infected, some relatively significant portion from getting significantly ill and possibly hospitalized, and probably 1 or 2 people from possible death. It's really easy to get motivated to show up the next day and the next day and the next day to do that work when you have such an incredible impact signal back to you. And so we have seen that our volunteers will volunteer themselves to the bone at the detriment of their careers, at the detriment of their family life, their social life. And so we have to be cognizant of that. One of our cultural values is this value that is change your socks. We ask people to reflect, inwardly, and to identify when they need to take a step back. We don't need any hero complex among our volunteers. And I would encourage you to think about your teams the same way. That individual says, I can't take time off, the team needs me to. Well, hey, stop trying to be a hero. I can promise you the wheels aren't going to fall off this thing if you step back for a day or even a week and unplug and recharge. I think it's really important. I think most important, leaders have to demonstrate that type of behavior at the top. Leaders have to visibly step away, step back, and really show and prove to people that, hey, if I can step away, you can too. And Dave, I'll close because I know we're coming out of time here with an example of that from the end of last year. My wife and I became pregnant. Well, my wife became pregnant. That would be quite a miracle of biology if I had as well. Early in COVID last year, and our child was due to be born in late November. And you have to understand, of course, that as a nonprofit, the last quarter of the year is our most significant fundraising period. And as we were entering the fourth quarter, because of all the carnage of COVID-19 in the economy, we were barreling towards a fairly significant net income loss, for a lot of reasons, mostly out of our control due to COVID. And so fundraising was number one priority. As the CEO and founder of the organization, I am the chief fundraising officer for Team Rubicon. And I pulled my team aside in October. I said, listen, I am leaving in mid-November because my child will be born, and I have promised my wife that I will be there, which means that you are all going to have to pick up the slack, and you're not going to be able to count on me for this. And I took the full 6 weeks that Team Rubicon affords any of its employees for paternity leave. And I didn't get one phone call in that 6 weeks to assist with any of the fundraising efforts. And by the time that I came back in early January, that team had closed the gap and narrowly eked out a positive net income. So we can't think of ourselves as heroes, and we can't empower a hero culture because it's unsustainable for organizations.
Yeah, thanks, Jake. And I think that was a very powerful example of leading by example. I mean, we often think that leading by example means work harder, do more, shoulder more of the burden. And when you made that decision, I thought that one, it showed that you trust the team, and two, it showed that you value family, and that you really expect the organization to be into this ethos of taking care of themselves. So I thought that, I mean, frankly, there are several decisions you made that I think are very courageous. That was one that I really thought stood out. So thanks for that, and thanks for all your time, everyone. Thanks for the questions. I'm going to hand it back to LJ. But Jake, great to see you, and thanks for sharing your time with us.
Of course, thanks for having me, Dave.
Thank you so very, very much, Jake, and thank you, David Calloway, for such great moderation of this program. When I called for our members and supporters to support the World Affairs Council Charlotte, let me also invite them now to support Team Rubicon and help them in their mission, which is both international and in the US, and it's a fantastic mission. Great job, Jake. I would like to turn it over to Mike Hawley, a board member of the World Affairs Council of Charlotte, former chairman of the board, who will close the program. Mike.
Yeah, thank you, Lubomir, and thank you, Jake. Really terrific presentation, very much appreciated. And for those of you that need a reminder, Jake's book is Once a Warrior, How One Veteran Found a New Mission Closer to Home. We are really proud of Dr. Dave Calloway and all that he has done for our community, and certainly for Team Rubicon, for what you guys are doing globally. It's just unbelievable. In Jake's book, one of the chapters is at Team Rubicon, quote, "We do chaos." And, if you have chaos, you can't think of better people than Jake and Dave Calloway to be involved getting it straightened out. What we do at the World Affairs Council is we provide perspective on chaos. And so as a result, we would love for you to be a member of the World Affairs Council, be a sponsor of our programs, participate in them, do whatever you can to foster the success of the World Affairs Council, which we feel is one of the best organizations in our region. So with that, I will ask you to make sure you see if you can get Jake's book. I'm sure you can get it in multiple places. Sign up with the World Affairs Council and keep Lubomir Steinbuch smiling, which he is doing right now. Lubomir, close us out.
Thank you so very much. Be safe, get vaccinated if you haven't, and we'll see you next week. Thank you so very much. Take care. Bye-bye.